Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
We're continuing our series on misunderstood Quranic verses. Last time we looked at chapter 7, verse 80, and now we're going to continue with verse 81 from the same chapter. So the verse goes like this: "You do come to men for sexual pleasure instead of to women. Nay, you are a people who transgress." And this is Mufti Muhammad Shafi's translation. So tell me what this means and what's so interesting about it.
This is a continuation, as you mentioned, from the previous verse where the story of Lut is being told, the prophet Lut, Lut in Arabic, Lot in English. So in the previous verse, he was saying to his people, okay, is it true? Is this what's happening? You are committing an outrage, which people, nobody before you outdid you in. And now the question continues. You are approaching men with lust instead of women. Rather, you are a people who exceed bounds. You are musrifun. So in Arabic, إنكم لتأتون الرجال شهوة من دون النساء بل أنتم قوم مسرفون. Now, what is interesting about this verse, Safiya, is that it is read two different ways among the accepted 10 readers. A couple of the readers, notably Nafi and Aasim, read it as I've just read, innakum, as if it's the start of a statement. But other readers read it as a question, innakum. So they have a short glottal stop before, and that is what is referred to as the hamza, and this is istifham, this hamza of, seeking information, is asking a question, basically. So for those who don't know Arabic, we know in English, if we're asking a question, we can ask by the rise of intonation. But if we're putting a question in the statement, in written form, then we would end the statement with a question mark, and that's how we would know the difference between a statement and a question. A statement might even end with an exclamation mark or just simply a full stop. But the question mark is the dead giveaway. This is a question. Well, in classical Arabic, there were no question marks. Now question marks are used in modern Arabic, but this is a modern invention. But the language itself, whether we use the modern question mark or not, the language itself is so structured that there are indications if it is a question. So something like the equivalent of a question mark is there, but it's not a question mark, it's a particle, and it comes at the beginning of the statement. So, so innakum, you are, innakum, are you, right? So the short introduction of at the beginning, like the in are you, right? This particle is read by most of the readers of the Quran, the accepted readers. So the whole thing is clearly a question. The other readers that I mentioned did not read it with that beginning particle to indicate a question. But Al-Qurtubi in his tafsir indicated that Nafi, one of these two readers who didn't read it with the beginning particle to indicate a question, nonetheless is noted to have considered it a continuation of the question which was already raised in the previous verse.
So you said all of the readings that do not have it as a question still consider it part of a question from a previous verse?
At least it is noted by this one reader. Who didn't start with the questioning particle, but he nonetheless is noted to have regarded this as a continuation of the previous question.
Okay.
And indeed, like looking at the two together, it is clear that this is a continuation of the question. It's not meant to be a direct statement. How do we know this? Because the story of Lut is told in the Quran several times. And in other chapters where the same story is told and the same statement is reproduced from Lut, there in the other chapters, it's not in the form of a statement, it's the form of a question. So, for example, in Surah Al-Ankabut, the 29th chapter of the Quran. So here too, it's in the form of a question. So that's a minor point just to clarify that people sometimes take things as statements and they run away with it and they become very firm in what they're saying because they know that they're dealing with a clear statement, which is different than something that was raised as a question. And this is an interesting part of this, and it's one of the ways ways in which the Quran is contrasting itself from the previous scriptures, and it's setting its own pattern of dealing with things. There is a great need, Safiya, in striking a balance and what is called in Arabic insaf when we deal with people, even people we don't agree with, people who have what our tradition may consider to be a deviant behavior. We still have to be fair with them, and we have to represent them properly and represent the behavior in a correct way as well, using science, using all of the knowledge that we have. The Quran, often in retelling the biblical stories, takes a different tinge, and that is indicative of the Quran's own approach to the question. So it's not just simply just reproducing what was there before. Whereas the Quran could have done that. The Quran could have said, this is the story of Lut, you already know it here exactly as you know it. But the Quran is daring to be different. So what's different about this? In the Bible, there is a clear statement that if two men are committing homosexual acts, then both should be killed. Leviticus chapter 20, verse number 13. That's in the what Christians would call the Old Testament. In the New Testament, in the book of Romans, chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, here both men who commit homosexual acts and women who commit homosexual acts are condemned. And apparently in reference to the men in particular, reflecting on the Old Testament reference that we just mentioned, Paul, the writer, says that they did these things and they deserve death within themselves. Apparently he's referring to the capital punishment, which was mentioned in the Old Testament. Very easily, the Quran could have reproduced a passage like this, but the Quran doesn't. And one has to ask why. And the answer must be that the Quran is trying to strike a balance between, on the one hand, sanctioning something that the Quran would consider to be lewd behavior, and on the other hand, so condemning it that the people might be considered to be like out of this world. You know, it's the Quran is striking a balance so that Muslims should approach people in a reasonable way on especially on this question. Now, coming back to this story of Lut, in the Bible, it is clear that the people came, they were demanding the guests of Lot, who were angels in human disguise. And the New International Version translation says they called out to Lut, send the men out so that we can have sex with them. And obviously they wouldn't be willing partners. So this would constitute homosexual rape. So is that what is at play in the Quran as well? We'll come to that in chapter 15 when we deal with the Quranic equivalent of that angel story, and maybe even in chapter 11, because there too the story is told. But here, for the present passage, Lut is saying to them, "Atatuna rijala shahwatan min dun nisa." Do you come to men? Now, taking it as a question, because we've settled that. Do you come to men with lust instead of women? Bal antum qawmun musrifun. But you are a people transgressing bounds. You're going ahead and committing excess. So this ties in with the previous verse where Lut says to them, "Ma sabakukum biha min ahadin min al-alamin." Nobody previous to you outdid you in this. So it's like they have gone over and above. So if we understand that in all societies, probably a small percentage of people practice homosexual acts and are even inclined that way, regardless of how they came to be like that, then it must be that Lut's people have gone over and above. And for this excess, that is why they're under condemnation. And this might explain also why the women and children were punished altogether along with the men. Because one might say, okay, the children, okay, if they die in infancy, according to Islamic theology, they'll have a better outcome in the life hereafter. So, okay, so theodicy helps to make sense of that one. If, however, the women were goading on the men to come and attack the guests of Lot, to commit this act of homosexual rape, because perhaps the women thought that this was a kind of a manly thing for their men to be doing to other men, especially strangers coming into town, then that would make them guilty and deserving of some reprimand. So there is more to the story than at first meets the eye. There's much more that needs discussion and careful thought. And
so your point is that because it was posed as a question, this leaves a lot of questions in our mind that things are, it doesn't seem like things are very definite.
It's not as clear
or not as definite as Muslims might imagine.
Yes, not as definite and clear cut. There are things to think about, and yes, of course,
and things to piece together and puzzle out. I feel
that's right. Yes. That's right. So rather than being very dogmatic and very strict in the way we speak of things and condemn people in a very harsh manner, we need to take a step back and understand the story more as a whole, and realize, yes, in the end, the Quran envisions a marriage to be that between a man and a woman, and sex outside of the marriage is prohibited according to the Quran. That's our given and starting point. But it doesn't mean that we excoriate other people beyond bound, because then we ourselves would become musrifun. We would be committing excess in our condemnation of other people. We need to take a balanced position in both in the things that we love and the things that we hate.
Interesting approach. Thank you, Dr. Shabir. I learned something from this discussion.
Sure, and I learned by even discussing it, and everything is from God.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Muslim Media Hub, the new home of Let the Quran Speak.
Here we spread positivity and good. We help people experience the beauty of Islam and help them appreciate and understand Muslims.
This beautiful building we purchased at cost $2.3 million.
Yeah, we've already raised a third of that money, and with your help, inshallah, we can pay off the rest.
So we're looking for people who can give $1,000 each. If you can be part of the select group, that's amazing.
Otherwise, just please give whatever you can. Every dollar counts.
It's our collective responsibility to share the message of Islam with our fellow human beings. Please help us continue this good work.
It's a sadaqah jariyah, something that will continue to be a benefit to the Muslim community long after Safiya and I are gone.
Please support our work at muslimmediahub.com.
Your support is zakat eligible and tax deductible.
May Allah bless you and your loved ones today and always. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.